So try and learn to overcome limbic friction by forcing yourself to do things that you don't want to do. Try and force yourself to not do things that you want to do, even trivial things. And what you're doing is you're building up these little circuitries. And the basal ganglia depend on dopamine. Different receptors for go and no-go, but dopamine. The deep relaxation restores your ability to do this. Remember, non-infinite but renewable. So the more plate spinning, the more go, no-goes you perform throughout the day, the more you deplete this circuitry. 30 minutes of a non-sleep deep rest or a good night's sleep, whatever that means for you, reinstates those dopamine levels. So it's, at the end of the day, we're more than a bag of chemicals, but this stuff has been baked into us.
So check this out. Something I've been teaching a decent amount lately, and it'll be very interesting to see how this overlays on your spinning plates. So I've been trying to teach people. Like, I got asked a question. I was up at an event, and at this event, some of my guys that work for me in the SEAL teams were there, Leif Babb and Andrew Paul, and these guys happened to tell a couple stories where, like, oh, Jocko did this, he made this decision right here, and it was great, and then, Andrew got up and said, oh, this other time Jocko made, and so they painted me in a great light, made me look really cool, and, I was kind of, my ego is inflating, and then during one of the breaks, a couple of guys that were there, these are business guys, they came up and, said, yeah, you have just such great instincts. It's so obvious, as a leader that you just have these great instincts. And I was kind of like, yeah, it's pretty. I'm really got really good instincts. And they kind of inflated my ego, and I felt great about myself. And then I went back. We were out in the woods, and I went back to my little cabin. And I started thinking to myself, wait a second. First of all, if the only thing I have is good leadership instincts, and I'm just a good natural leader, and that's what I have, what good is it to me to be able to talk to anyone else about it if it's just something that I naturally have that no one else can have? That doesn't make any sense. And I said, and by the way, I know for a fact I didn't always have these things. So then I started thinking about, well, how do I actually make decisions when I've got a bunch of chaotic things going on? And I sat down and I wrote down what I do in my brain when things are happening, when things are going on, when there's an enemy contact, when there's a problem out on the battlefield, or when there's a business problem. What am I doing? And I wrote down sort of these things that I think about. And I ended up saying, oh, hey, we went back later that night, and I said, hey, you guys asked me this question and asked me about my instinct. Well, let me tell you, it's not instinct. I am running a loop in my head to check that I am going in the right direction. Number one thing I always think about is time. How much time do I have right now? Something's going on, and I have to make a decision. Do I have 20 minutes to make that decision? Do I have 3 minutes to make? Do I have to make a decision right now? I think about the fundamental laws of combat that we talk about all the time. Like, hey, are we going to support each other if I make this decision? Is it going to help us as a team if I make this decision? Oh, and by the way, can I communicate it simply? Okay, if I can communicate it simply, great. Hey, where does this fall on our priority list? What number priority? Is this a higher priority than what we've been doing? Do I need to shift priorities? Do I need to tell everyone to shift priorities? Or does this not fit the top priority? Decentralized command. Can I delegate this problem to someone else? Can I give it to them so that I can then look up and out? And I had this, so I went through this list of things. Hey, is this part of the mission that we're actually trying to do? Because sometimes you're on a mission and you get distracted by something else, and all of a sudden you get focused on that. You can't allow yourself to do that. And I had this whole list of things, of these thoughts that I will go through. And the most important thing as I get done explaining this list of things to people is you can't get caught on any one of these things. If you get caught on the time factor, you'll never figure out if this is actually part of the mission. If you only focus on, hey, is this part of our mission, you might run out of time before you make a decision. So in my mind, when you talk about these spinning plates, I get it. And what I realize, and when you were talking about looking at a shadow and paying attention to it, you do have to pay attention to that. You have to check on it, but you can't forget about everything else that's going on. So this is an interesting dynamic when I hear that my frontal lobe has these spinning plates. Well, I know that I can't really pay attention to them all at the same time. So I have to kind of like check this one, give it a little spin, check this one, balance it, check this one, balance it. And if I get focused on one, another one's going to get dropped. So that's what I do is I go through and I look, okay, let me check this, let me check this, let me check this. And I keep going around in a circle in a loop. And this can all happen in a half a second. You can do all these things over and over again. But if you get stuck in one of these things, you're going to fall apart. And this goes back to, you ever heard of the OODA loop? Right. Observe, orient, decide, and act. It's the same thing. You have to keep it moving. And if you get stuck on trying to decide what to do, I can't make a decision, you're going to fall apart. If you get stuck in action, which some people think, oh, that'd be good, you're taking action. No, but if you are taking action, but you're not running the feedback and seeing how this action is affecting everything else that's happening around you, you have to do the action, then you have to go back and observe how it's impacting the scenario, and then orient yourself to where you are now, and then decide if that was a good action or not. So this idea of spinning plates is very interesting to me because they're out there. I know that there's times when I have all these plates spinning, and I know that if I get focused on one of those spinning plates, I'm going to drop some other ones, and then everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah, it's the examples you provide are really key because, first of all, it's high demand work. One can get comfortable, what we're referring to as spinning plates. Some people experience overwhelm trying to do two things. We so value this notion of focus, and focus is wonderful, but we sometimes forget that the brain does not have one spotlight of focus. The way to think about focus is we are old world primates, and we can do something called covert attention. So I can talk to you, pay attention to you, but I can also pay attention to echo. I've got two spotlights. I can intensify a spotlight. I can start to pay attention to some specific feature of what you're saying or doing. And as I do that, he starts to disappear a little bit, and then I can switch, right? These are the attentional mechanisms of the forebrain. If you want to play that game, I assure you, if we put you in a scanner, your prefrontal cortex will be lighting up like crazy, meaning high levels of metabolic activity there. I can also take those two spotlights and merge them to a single location. I can make them more intense, I can broaden them, and I can make them more diffuse. We don't have three spotlights, we have two. But we don't just have one. And so if you understand attention as two spotlights, maybe one that's right there and one that's drifting, maybe two that can merge to a specific location, or if you need to, when we talk about spinning multiple plates, what we're talking about is toggling back and moving those spotlights and knowing that at one point, as you described, attention will truly be off some element, and which element it is off of and what it's on is crucial in high stakes, high consequences scenarios like you described. It's vital to survival. So we can learn how to do this, however. Learning how to sit down and read a book without any distraction, or I actually like to put my phone right next to me and do a bunch of no-goes. Every time that thing calls me, I just give it a little, no, F you, no. And you're practicing the no-go pathway and reading a book. The other thing that's very useful for developing focus is something that people don't do often enough anymore, including me, which is writing in complete sentences. The ability to write and think in complete sentences is hard work. I have a colleague at Stanford, Carl Diceroth. He no doubt will win a Nobel Prize. He's a psychiatrist and a bioengineer and incredibly successful in science, also has 5 kids, practicing clinical psychiatrist. And I asked him, what is your tool? What in the world are you doing? And he says, well, at least once every 24 hours, I sit down in a chair and I force myself to stay completely motionless and think only in complete sentences for about a half an hour. I tried doing this for about 5 minutes. It is really tough. I invite anyone to try and only write in complete sentences for 5 minutes when they journal, as opposed to and or texting. We tend to use descriptive clauses, and we tend to do fragments now, and we're starting now. The brain thinks in kind of fragments and symbols, and that's very efficient. We wouldn't want to only think in complete sentences, but by writing in complete sentences, by forcing that pain of writing or that pain of thinking in a structured way, you are building up, you are reinforcing the neural circuits that support the so-called spinning of multiple plates, the ability to move the spotlight to a single location. You're learning how to harness the spotlight at one location. And so I think a lot of people don't realize they can train these circuits related to attention. You might say, well, how could writing complete sentences help me multitask? That doesn't make any sense. You're still taking control of these attentional systems. It's like learning how to operate any vehicle. Of course, it's not going to allow you to operate that vehicle in every context and in every way that vehicle could be operated, but you're learning the basic mechanics of attention when you force yourself to write in complete sentences, to think or speak in complete sentences. This is why I do the long podcast. I do these 2.5-hour podcasts by myself, and it's hard. And I think, this is hard, but I can't just say a half a sentence and then just drop it because I know the rest of what I wanted to say. It's work, but it feels good. And this is the other element, which is that over time, the dopamine system can be woven into the systems that control effort. I guess the notion of growth mindset is, learning to couple, Carol Dweck's beautiful work, is learning to couple the notion that effort is good for us, but neurochemically we can start to experience friction and think, this is growing me. In any other context it would be corny, but in this context, and because of a Leah Crum's study of Navy SEALs, I can appropriately say, learn to think about effort like a SEAL would, which is, this is growing me. In that thought, you are releasing dopamine in response to effort. In other words, the more friction, you always say good, more friction, good. I actually think about that a lot. I've had some trying circumstances recently, uninteresting for sake of this podcast, and I thought, God, this is either going to make or break us. And I thought, what if I just decided that the more stress now, the better it's going to be? And it's instantaneous, but then you have to keep doing that. And then when you wake up sleep deprived, you have to do it again. And when someone triggers you, have to do it again. So I love the OODA loop. And I love that you raised, for the first time I heard someone raise the OODA loop, not as something that's done once, but it's done over and over and over. So it's OODA loops, plural.
Yeah.
And I think we always hear about it as a unitary thing, but it's OODA loops, like you're in observation over here and you're in action on this one.
Yep.
And so it's multiple OODA loops.
Yep. And by the way, you're running like a tactical, low-level, like real-time, short-term OODA loop for what I'm going to get out of this right now. But at the same time, you're running a bigger OODA loop, or you should be, a strategic OODA loop that's looking at like, well, how is this going to affect me, 6 months from now? And then you've got an even bigger one that's going 5 years.
That's
and you've
the
got
axis.
all these different OODA loops going on at the same time that you have to be running.
Yeah. Forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's the I was just too excited. I got too excited. I didn't suppress my forebrain. The interrupting is a forebrain limbic friction glitch. Forgive me. That's your forebrain accessing the library of past, present, and future.
This, when you talked about, here's another interesting crossover. So a lot of times when I talk about people taking a step back, taking a breath, looking around, it's the word I use for them for doing that is detach. You have to detach from the chaos and the mayhem. You have to detach from your own emotions. Well, interestingly, another thing I will tell people when they've got more of a, let's say, a slow burning problem that they want to figure out a solution for, one of the things I recommend they do is they write down what the problem is, write down what some various solutions are. And what that does is it literally detaches you from the problem, because now you're having to think through really what this problem is and how you're going to articulate it on a piece of paper for yourself. And then you're going to look at it from a detached perspective. You're going to read the words that you wrote. And it really does allow you to see a new perspective and hopefully find a solution. And another thing I've been saying a lot lately is the solutions to your problem are not in the problem. When you have a problem, the solutions are not in there. If the solutions were in there, it wouldn't be a problem. You just solve it. You have to get outside the problem. You have to figure out how to take a step back, how to see it from a different perspective. Because if the solution to the problem was in the problem, you would just execute on that thing. It wouldn't even be an issue. So we have to take a step back. And one of the best ways to do that, if you have the time and the opportunity to do it usually in what we call in the military an administrative situation, meaning there's no bullets flying, sit down, write down what is going on, what the problem is, maybe what some ideas are about viable solutions. But I think it's even better just to really detail what you see the problem is, because if you start trying to write down solutions, you're already trying to impose solutions on it. Write down what the problem is. Look at it. Walk away from it. Come back and read it again. And you're going to start to see that you're going to have a better chance of finding a solution than if you're living inside the problem.